Hi, y'all. This is Kristen Chenoweth.
Hi, I'm Gloria Stefan.
This is Sarah Bareilles.
Hi, I'm Patty Lapone.
This is Lin-Manuel Miranda. You're listening to the Broadway Podcast Network.
There's a cat over here. There's a cat over there. And the wrong one died. And the wrong one died.
Welcome to The Wrong Cat Died, the podcast breakdown of the catastrophe. I'm your host, Mike Abrams, and today we have another amazing guest. We are working with the Perelman Performing Arts Center reimagined production of Cats called Cats, the Jellicle Ball to bring you a series of episodes during their run. Today's guest has been involved with the show since the beginning. She is the dramaturg and gender consultant on the show and has done so much more. So welcome, Josephine Kearns, and thank you for joining me.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited because you have been around since day one on this. So I actually want to start from that beginning idea when you and Bill were chatting. What was the inception? I mean, it's been over 2 years to this idea to bring it to where it is today.
Yeah, it's been 4 years.
Wow.
Yeah, so it started, I was introduced to Bill by our agents during lockdown. And our agents were putting a thing together just because theater artists had very little to do during that time. We were at the same agency and our agents were putting together calls of just like people they think should meet. And after I was on one of those calls with Bill, he reached out to me directly and said, like, I have this nugget of an idea for Cats. Would you be interested in talking about it? And the nugget of the idea was basically just Cats, but people and queer, even more than original Cats is queer. And we just started, I think pretty early on, we started having weekly calls to talk through ideas. We had a lot of thoughts of setting the show in either 1939 when T.S. Eliot's poems were published or 1981 when Cats debuted. And leaning on those years, we talked for a while about maybe setting it in like a disco Studio 54 kind of era. But pretty quickly, Bill had the thought of maybe this is ballroom. And he got connected to Omari Wiles, the choreographer. And yeah, it all kind of took off from there.
Yeah, I love that. So it was kind of just like good people meet good people and ideas spark from that, which is such a way the world works of, the right place at the right time. So then you kind of have the idea of ballroom and you said it's been 4 years. I think the world learned about it 2 years ago because your casting notice sparked some like really interesting social media of what is this. So can you walk me through the rest of that journey? Because I think people are seeing now the final product, but there was so much more from that idea to the ballroom idea to what we see today.
Yeah, there were a lot of steps. And I think there were sort of two processes happening at once. One was, let's develop what we want this show to be, the way that you would a new work. Even though we had the music, we still had to, a lot of I don't want to spoil too much, but a lot of the story has been reimagined and reinvented. And so figuring out what we wanted that to look like and how it fit this container of ballroom, or I guess more how ballroom fit this container of Cats.
Yeah.
And then there was this other process happening very much in the background of talking to Andrew Lloyd Webber's company about what we would be able to do and working out details with them and sending them samples. And none of them had any familiarity at all with the ball scene. And so there was a lot of education happening and things like that. And there were a lot of, we did 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe 6 workshops of varying types. One was just like an initial dance and music, like get some ideas on video with like 3 or 4 dancers. One of those dancers was Primo, who ended up playing Tumble Brutus in the full production. Mm-hmm. And then there were 2 other dance workshops. There was a music workshop, and we had 2 full, I can't remember if they were 2 or 3 week long, like let's work our way through as much of the show as we can. And a lot of the folks who were involved in those 2 workshops ended up in the final cast.
So when you're doing workshops like this and you're reimagining, what's the process for you all to where you take the source material, but blend it into this new version? Like, how did you decide throughout each step of, I don't want to change this, but I want to tweak this, and I want to change this dance, but I want to keep this song? Like, how did you go through all of those step by step throughout the show for especially something so well known? Like, Most people, like, this show's been around for 45 plus years.
I keep meaning to go back and look at our original planning documents to see how much is different. But we sort of laid out the show, and I, fortunately, this was such a random thing, but I was lucky that when I was in college, I worked at a summer stock theater that did Cats, and I was running follow spot for it. So I learned the show backwards and forwards because I saw it, 40, 50 times that summer. And so I was sort of a resident Cats expert just because of this random experience. Bill and Omari didn't know the story that well. And it was a lot of fitting it was like, okay, let's look at the Cats show, because we knew we would keep every song, with the possible exception of the two that are often not done, Peaks and the Pollicles and Growl Tiger. And we just sort of laid it out next to like how a ball normally goes, right? The ball, everybody arrives, they do the LSS, the Legend Statements and Stars, that matched up with Naming of Cats. And so as much as we could, just sort of like lining those stories up and figuring out how to make sense of it.
Yeah. Did you notice that it lined up perfectly? I mean, like, it lines up really cleanly.
It became pretty clear as we were working through that, like, oh, this is, like, I remember very early on us saying, like, oh, this is going to make more sense of Cats, actually. And there were some numbers, like the Naming of Cats, we knew immediately that it was going to be Mochastrap, the commentator, the MC, sort of delivering that in an LSS style. We knew that Jellicle Songs for Jellicle Cats was going to be everyone arriving at the ball. And then some of the other pieces were much less clear, and we had to sort of figure out how they fit in. Our original concept for the overture was that it was going to fill the space with projections of our characters, like at home, getting ready for the ball, doing makeup, running to CVS, catching a cab, like all of those sorts of pieces, and morphed into, God, I don't even know how many different ideas over time before we landed on what's actually happening in the show now. So some of the numbers, like, we knew very quickly and never really changed, and others changed over and over and over again as we sort of tried to figure out how it was going to all fit together. And there were two sort of pieces to that too. There was the piece of the overarching story of the ball, and especially how numbers like Naming of Cats, Old Deuteronomy, Memory, Little Memory, how those sort of plot numbers fit the show, all the little McCaffrey bits, that sort of thing. And then there was also, so we knew, again, very early on that the sort of parade of characters numbers would all be categories in the ball. But we had to figure out what categories and how that would work. And some of those were very easy and some of those were very challenging. We knew from the outset that Mistopheles would be runway, just because that's sort of the peak of the show and the peak of the ball. But some of the others were changing up until a few months ago, honestly.
Yeah. Yeah, the competition aspect is something I was so excited for, because I had one of my initial jokes about seeing the show was I saw Leona Lewis and saw Grisabella, so I thought I saw the X Factor on drugs. And so I had felt like that from day one. And so when I heard that you were going to have this competition-based element, and there was going to be winners, and there was going to be like the actual piece to that, I thought this is brilliant, because this is what a lot of us thought when we saw it the first time. And so the weaving that part in was beautiful and fantastic. And something you said earlier, which I completely agree with, is I think this version brings the story and poetry out maybe more clear than other versions have. And I've heard some Cats haters have loved this production, or at least tolerated this production, because I think it's given them.
Like, if I had $1 for every time someone said, I've always hated Cats, but I love this Cats, like I'd have doubled my salary on the show at least. Like, it's been a lot.
I think that's great, because part of the Cats is an easy joke. It's an easy punchline, but also it can be confusing if you're not the super fans or someone like me who's just heard hundreds of different explanations of the story at this point, to piece it together. And you all bring those elements in. So was that intentional, or was that something that just came by the byproduct of trying to do it in ballroom?
I think one of the other things we knew really early on was that we wanted to be really authentic with the show. And we've always been very, very aware of what it means to take this very like underground scene of very marginalized people and placing it into a container like the PAC that is so corporate. And so I think the budget on the show ended up being several $1,000,000. And we wanted to just like treat the ball scene with such care and such reverence. And I hope we accomplished that, but that drove a lot of the decisions too. Like we knew that, you know, for example, in the original Cats, I don't even remember what the doubling is, but like the actor that plays Gus also plays Bustifer maybe, or something like that.
Yeah,
and
Bustifer like, and an ensemble dancer in the beginning in the most recent ones.
And it's like, when they're playing Gus, they're in age makeup. And when they're playing Bustifer, they're in a fat suit. And we were like, no. This is a show actually about people of different ages and different sizes. And Deuteronomy is actually going to be old. And Grisabella and Gus are actually going to be elders. And as much as possible, authentic people from the ball scene. Junior LaBeija, who plays Gus, I don't know his official title, if he's a legend or an icon or what, but he's very, very esteemed in the ballroom scene. Temperance, who plays Grisabella, same thing. So that drove a lot of it too, just in terms of like, you know, if we were going to do Cats but people, we wanted the people to be real people.
Yeah.
And so figuring out how to make sense of that as well, and like minimizing costume doubling also was important to us.
Yeah. One thing I would love to hear a little bit about, because I thought it was a really interesting piece I was not expecting, was the beginning of Act 2. You kind of drop a curtain down essentially and show a video that highlights some of the legends and icons of the ballroom scene. And that was, as someone who came in with all Cats knowledge and pretty minimal ballroom knowledge, I thought that was a really, really cool aspect of the show. So what was, you know, again, what's actually happening there, and how did that decision come to life?
Yeah, it's actually one of the things I'm most proud of. That was an idea I had a couple years ago. It, again, came out of that reverence for the ball scene and just like knowing that, like, you know, one of the things we've tried to hold from the outset is that our audience would include folks who were very familiar with ballroom, who were in ballroom. Our audience would include a lot of queer folks. Our audience would include a lot of Black and Latinx folks, and also would include a lot of cishet folks, white folks, people who aren't familiar with ballroom. And so we wanted to make sure that we were telling a story both that, and various familiarity with Cats also, right? And so we wanted to sort of hold all of that at one time and tell a story that was informative for folks who were less familiar with these things, while also, you know, not it being, we didn't want it to be like a Ballroom 101 that folks who were from the scene might not have as much to gain from the show. So we were trying to hold that balance really carefully. And Moments of Happiness came from that place. And it just, like, you know, it's a song about history. So it felt so important to me to say, like, okay, yes, this is where we're going to integrate the history of this scene into the show, overlaying Deuteronomy singing. And it could all at once be, for folks who aren't familiar with ballroom, means of seeing the journey that ballroom has gone on from the earliest pageant days. And also for folks who are familiar with ballroom, a celebration of all that it has been and the history that they, of course, are much more familiar with. So it served that dual purpose. And also, I think, just served as like a really beautiful image to open Act 2 with.
Yeah, it was, again, you hit the nail on the head with your audience. I was at the second preview and we were at the cabaret tables, but around us were
amazing
some guys who were talking about how they are theater fans. And then there was, to the left of us, there was a group from I think they were some with the judges, but they were clearly the ballroom group because they were loving that. And then all around there were families, and there was it was just a very diverse audience. And as we were talking to the people next to us, it's like, oh, this group knows Cats and knows theater. And then this group knows ballroom, but doesn't know Cats. And so being able to see, like, when I come back, I want to sit almost in the back. I want to sit in the back and just watch the audience a little bit to kind of see how everybody reacts, because there is such a different, like, you're going to pick something up. And I've told everyone who loves cats that you have to see it because you're going to love it because it's true to the story, but also tells you in a different way. And if you hate cats, you got to go see it because you're going to probably, if nothing else, you're going to have such an energetic and fun evening that you might pick up the appreciation for the source material that you didn't have before. And if nothing else, you're going to have a club-like vibe and energy that it'll be a fun night out. And so I think people are realizing that they're learning something else from this show that they didn't recognize or know, that maybe they didn't expect walking in, which is amazing to see. And also to see all the representation and to bring these two worlds together in a unique way was fun to watch and fascinating to see. And kudos to you all for merging it all together in such a beautiful way.
Yeah, thank you. A lot of that played into casting too. Our cast was a mix of musical theater people and ballroom people. And there were some learning pains, growing pains, I don't know what to call them, but where along the way we sort of learned what sorts of experiences folks needed to have in order to be able to even do this.
Yeah.
And there were some musical theater folks that weren't a great fit, and there were some ballroom folks that weren't a great fit for various reasons. It was just part of authentically merging these two things. And I've spoken a couple times already about reverence for ballroom, but we wanted to treat cats with reverence too. Like, I don't think any of us loved cats when we came in, but it is like it's a huge piece of the history of musical theater.
Yeah.
And so we wanted to be respectful of that as well. And I think all of us fell in love with cats in various ways as we worked through it together.
Yeah, it's one of those shows that I've very rarely meet someone who's done it who does not have it like a soft spot in their heart for it after doing it, even if they didn't love it going in or didn't know much about it. I think doing it brings a different appreciation to the story. Like, there's a lot more there than you realize if you just see it once. And so I think that that's definitely held true. I want to ask one more question before we go to the rapid fire. Without spoiling, you all did make some changes, and I would love to hear how you thought through some of those. What were your favorite ones? That's without giving away too much of the story for people who are still coming to see this.
Yeah, the changes all also came from a place of authenticity and saying okay, accepting that we're keeping the song. I mean, there was never a discussion of changing the songs. Mm-hmm. And so it was if we accept that we keep them, how do we make sense and how do we make a story that makes sense of what's going on here? And I mean, the two biggest changes, which we're still working on the best way to convey them up until opening night, and which I honestly watched opening night and was oh, these are changes I would maybe still make if we do this again, were the McCavity storyline and the Grisabella storyline, and just who they are and what their relationship to the rest of the room is. Those are two things that we really sort of said, okay, let's rethink this. And I hope we landed in an interesting place with that. I mean, like I said, there's still some things for me that I'm oh, I wish we could have communicated this more clearly. But those were the beats that we focused on most strongly, I think.
Yeah. I will tell you, I saw the second preview, so there's at least a week, I think, between that and opening. The Grisabella storyline is the clearest I've ever seen, and as someone who spent 170 plus episodes arguing against her as a Jellicle choice, I have found this one to be the hardest to argue against because of how clear the picture is of the way she integrates back into the scene. And so I will shout out to that. I will say kudos there. I thought that was a very, very clear picture.
I mean, nothing against you, but it was one of our goals was making it very clear why she was the Jellicle choice. So
yeah, which you all did. I'm not ready to change my show title. I'm not ready to change my decisions, but I do think you took away the argument that's most commonly made, which is that she needs to stay and Gus should go, but your Gus, Junior's not ready to go. Junior's still living life on the stage. And so that one's out the window. We're going to take a quick break, and then we'll be back for more of The Wrong Cat Died. We'll get into the Jellicle choice at the end here, but let's do some quick rapid fire first. If you could go on as one cat for one night, who would you want to perform as?
Ooh, yeah, and all of them. I've said all along that the glue that holds the show together is Victoria and Tumble Brutus. Those are our two like dance first folks from the ball scene who are both absolutely incredible. I wish I had Baby's skill set who plays Victoria. But I actually argued early on that those should be considered leads and not supporting or ensemble characters just because of how much lift they give to the show. So I think that's my answer. I think I would be Victoria.
Okay. Who are your favorite and least favorite cats personality-wise? Like, which one would you want to hang with and which one would kind of bug you?
Question. I love Jelly Lorm. I think Jelly Lorm would be so much fun to hang out with. And, like, I'm a pretty chill person overall. So, like, that kind of fits the vibe, I think. Ballerina and Demeter are super fun, the way that they're portrayed in this show. I think I would have, like, a fun night out with a lot of the characters, but not necessarily be, like, BFFs. There's a lot of egos in this show, which, you know, when you're creating a competition, makes sense.
Do you have a least favorite? Who bugs you?
Oh, least favorite. I mean, probably McCavity.
Yeah. The villain, right?
The villain. I mean,
okay.
I don't think villain is the right word for McCavity in this show. At least we didn't want it to be.
Yeah.
But there's still a very strong personality of a certain type there.
Yeah, it doesn't have that same, I mean, that is, as you mentioned, a different storyline you're telling. Not completely, but you definitely have a different version by being in the competition and still having some other aspects versus being purely a villain in, you know, the stage productions of Cats. So, yeah, but that's a very common answer of like, that is McCavity's a vibe. What is your favorite song in the show?
It changes every night.
Okay.
I think Mungo Jerry and Rumple Teaser is the one that I have the most fun watching, just because that's the one where we get into the most serious vogue. And watching those, again, I don't want to spoil too much, but watching all of the performers that are in that number is just so much fun. I love Bustafer. I love, and the ones I'm naming are not even like musical favorites. They're just the ones that I like enjoy the staging and the performances the most, honestly. Yeah, I love watching Mistopheles is super fun. It was stressful during previews because of, again, not spoiling, but some of the things that happened during that song were very tricky to get right. And it's funny because normally with any musical I work on, there's numbers that I'm just like, okay, I just got to grit my teeth and get through this one. And that was certainly true when I was running Follow Spot for the original Cats. But for this one, there really aren't any that I dread or don't look forward to. I feel like they're all crucial parts of the story. So,
yeah, that's amazing. Okay, my one fun question is, assuming that every cat had their own house, whose house would you want to join?
Ooh, I mean, some of the cats we've established very clearly are members of existing houses.
Can you share which ones are which?
Yeah, so you know, of course, Mogo Jerry and Rumple Teaser are in the same house. I don't know that we ever named that one. Ballerina and Demeter are in the House of McCavity. Victoria, Tumble Brutus, Cassandra are in the House of Dots with Jenny Annie Dots as the house mother.
House of Dots, I love that.
And we set up Grisabella as the founding mother of the House of Glamour. I think those were all the ones that we explicitly defined in our process. I would have a lot of fun being in Bustafer's house, whatever house that is. I think that would be a blast. I think Tugger's house could be fun. Yeah, those might be my top two.
All right, most important question. I've argued at length. I don't think it should be Grisabella. So obviously in your production, you've very clearly established the story arc to make it Grisabella. But knowing, having done Cats before in summer stock, if you were picking your Jellicle choice, who would you pick and why?
I think in our Cats, there's really no other choice. I think it's very clear that part of what it means to be a legend, to be an icon in ballroom is longevity. Most of the cats that are in our show just don't establish themselves as that, as characters who have that. I think maybe the one who gets closest is Bustafer. I keep coming back to Bustafer, I think partly because Nora's performance is so brilliant in that role. But none of them feel right to me. The only one that feels right to me is Grisabella. And I agree with what you said earlier, that Gus just isn't ready.
Well, shout out to Nora, because that Bustafer Jones is usually a a fairly ripped on cat as a cat, and I had the same reaction. Was Buster Jones is fun. Like, this number is fun and lively, and so I agree. Let me ask you one more question about this then, because I think the crux of this, my like argument, is depends on what you define the Heaviside Layer as. So when I don't think I'm spoiling anything. People know she's going to go to the Heaviside Layer. It's pretty well established at this point.
If they're listening to your podcast.
Yeah, they should know. What is your definition of the Heaviside Layer for your particular production?
Yeah, I mean, because they're not literal cats, the whole sort of like live conceit doesn't make a lot of sense. We sort of defined it in our heads as like, we didn't associate, there are lots of different words that are associated with like the absolute annals of ballroom history and who those people are. We didn't pick a particular one, but maybe it is being an icon or something like it. But the idea was that like the winner of this competition enters a hallowed place in ballroom history that they hold forever.
So that to me is a very different question than what I've been posing from day one, because mine has been you're put to your death essentially in cats. Yeah. And that is an entirely different discussion of which one deserves that and needs that versus here of like which one deserves that status. So from that standpoint, I'm not even going to try to argue the point, because I agree, although you could argue that with that, it could be Gus then again, because it's the same similar type of thing. But I love that because it was, and the way you all stage it too. I don't want to spoil that, but I thought that was also great because it didn't. I've kind of joked that going up and the tire has always been like you're getting sacrificed, like you're going to your death, and you kind of made it a lot less that way, which again brings the story back together. So such a fun way to again reimagine this show, and I hope people are. I mean, I know people are running to get tickets because it's very hard to get tickets right now, which is incredible. But this has been so fun. Thank you so much for sharing your experience.
Thank you.
And I'm glad that 4 years later, your vision is on stage, and it's awesome to see it. And I'm glad the reception's been amazing.
It's been amazing. Yeah. And it was very cool too. So many of our people on the team walked into the space and were like, oh my God, look at this space. And I walked in and I was like, yep, this is it.
Yeah.
This is what we've been talking about. And it's been very cool to see that brought to life. And also just like shout out and so much love and respect to our cast, to our creative team, to Rachel Hauk, our set designer, to Queen Jean, our costume designer, to our entire wardrobe crew, which does, oh my God. I mean, we've been saying for years that this is a show about quick changes. Yeah, there's just so much heavy lifting done by so many different departments at the same time. And it's been cool to see all of that come together to create something that is very, very close to a vision that we had years ago, which is really cool.
Yeah, that's amazing. Amazing to see. How can people stay in touch with you on social media and everything?
I have a website. It's just josephinekearns.com. Kearns is Kearns. And I'm on Instagram under the same handle. It's just josephine.kearns, and would be happy to take inquiries either way. Amazing.
Well, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story and telling us a lot of really cool parts to behind the scenes of this, which I hope everyone who gets to see this will now have a different appreciation of it.
I hope so too. I'm so appreciate your taking the time to talk, and I'm so glad you enjoyed it. And I'm so glad to also make you rethink the title of your podcast, even if only for a moment.
Yeah, it did. I did have a moment when we walked out where I was like, this one's going to be hard to argue against. I'm going to have to think. But my argument's not against Grisabella's story or her arc or her redemption. It's about the sacrificing her at the end.
Totally.
And so that's where it's like, again, this reimagined version almost eliminates some of that, which means that I'm asking a different question.
Totally.
But it's always fun to hear different interpretations of everything, which is why this show still exists, is being able to, or my show still exists, is being able to capture different thought processes and the way people interpret backstories and everything that goes, because it is different from cast to cast.
Totally.
Wow, this has been so much fun. So thank you, and thanks everyone else for listening to this episode of The Wrong Cat Died, the podcast breaking down the catastrophe. To follow along, you can subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else listen to podcasts. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and Threads at The Wrong Cat Died, or check out our website, thewrongcatdied.com.